All right, so this is the Dev Book Club. We're going over implementing domain-driven design by Vaughn Vernon. Tonight we're going to be talking about Chapter 9, which is modules. I'm joined by Bo tonight, and we scheduled this on Canada Day, so our usual guest appearances by Jeremy and or Eric are not going to be happening tonight, I don't think, so that's okay. But should be an interesting discussion over a surprisingly short chapter, I would say. A lot shorter than even the shorter chapters before, or at least I felt like it read significantly shorter than others. I don't know if that was just my perception or whatever, but it seemed to go very quickly. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
No, I actually refer to this chapter quite a bit because there's a lot of ideas in here for organizing things, and I feel like that's one of the things I struggle with quite a bit, is knowing where to place things. So it's kind of nice to see it laid out.
Definitely, one of the things that I found I kind of laughed at significantly was when I first was reading through it, and I saw he mentioned, certain people or certain times people will take this idea of like organizing code, and they'll have like they'll base things based off of their utility, I guess, inside their layout or whatever. So they'll have like a repositories directory or like a infrastructure directory or something like that, and that will be their, or like that module will represent like all their repositories or all their aggregates will be in one, and then and I kind of laughed because the very first application I was like, I'm going to try to use this domain-driven design thing. I did exactly that. I started out on that pattern. And I was like, you know what? I think it kind of makes sense to have these separated, because I was getting caught in the trap of thinking, well, this is like infrastructural, so it's database access, so I want to have it separate. So then why wouldn't I also want to have all of my repositories separate from other things? And like I kind of ended up with folders that had just collections of every subdomain, every subcontext within my application. Like all of the stuff in that particular type was in a same directory, and I was like, this makes zero sense. So it was kind of funny to read that this is apparently a common problem that people run into if they're not like paying attention, I guess, when they first start implementing. So I don't know, I kind of enjoyed that sentence or whatever.
Have you seen the Architecture of the Lost Years video?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, I thought of that quite a bit in this section, where I think that talk starts out discussing how every Rails app looks like a Rails app.
Yeah.
And it sort of touched on the same sort of ideas that, why would you just put all your controllers in the controllers directory just because they're controllers?
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you anything about the application other than it's a Rails app. So yeah, Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean that talk, I think the first time I ever watched it, I was like, this makes so much sense to me. And this had been after years of using like Zen Framework 1, and I've been using some other things, and I played around with like Rails and played around with some other stuff, and so like I had all these preconceived, this is how you work in a modern framework. This is how you organize your code, is you've got your controllers and you've got your models, and they're just this models directory, or at least in those applications. Is that you or me that's making the swishy sound?
A swishy sound?
Yeah, it sounds like
probably me.
Rubbing. Okay, no, I mean that's okay. I was just wondering.
Does it sound like a dance party? Because the second floor of this building has a fitness center / dance studio in it, and they're playing very loud music right now.
Oh, I don't know what it is. It's just, I was just curious if it was my microphone or not. But yeah, okay, cool. So anyway, so like, I was curious when I was watching that if it was just my experience of like, oh, you've got this application, you've got this models directory, so all of your models go in here. So like I just been doing it for so long that it just made sense to me that I had a models directory, and inside that was 50,000 or however many, however many models I needed. They were all in that directory. Yeah. And then it's like, well, maybe I should organize these. So you can put them in subdirectories, and you've got like this big mess. You're just trying to figure it out, and then it's like you hit this epiphany. You're like, maybe instead of organizing these by their implementation or like what they are, I should organize them by problems that they solve and group them together. And then you're like, oh, that's where this whole entire chapter makes sense, right? It's the idea of grouping things into modules that make sense, that are related. Oh, I get it.
Yeah. So, sort of on this, I said that I had something interesting I found. You know how everyone complains about the lack of implementation, like actually seeing the final product
Yes.
when reading
I'm
these
one of those
books,
people.
reading this book?
Yes. Yes.
I found the source code. Did you find it too?
I have not found the source code for this particular book.
Yes. Yes. The entire project is online.
The Sassovation
It's on
project?
GitHub. Yes, the entire thing. All of the implementation, all of the questions we have are, we could just pour through the code, and I've been doing that for the last week.
Huh. Well, that's
Everything is there.
interesting.
Yeah, so I wanted to share that with whoever showed up today, and maybe we can send a link out to everybody. I don't know the best way to distribute that, but like all of this organization stuff, you can actually look and see how it's been done throughout the entire project for all of the, you can look at how everything is done and kind of how he's progressing throughout the book to different styles. Like I think it's the one of the top level products. I think it might be the Agile PM project is event sourcing, and then the collaboration context is all done using like a standard ORM implementation. So like you can actually see all of the different styles of everything. it's it's amazing.
Well,
So
that's.
yeah,
I feel cheated now.
I
Where
do
did this
too,
stuff
right?
like is
It
it?
has been on
It's
GitHub.
not Vaughn Vernon's thing, or
It is Vaughn Vernon. It was not listed anywhere in the book. I actually scanned through the book after I found it, and I don't know how we were supposed to know that was there. It's not in the Kindle version, but yeah,
oh, his
it's
thing
Vaughn Vernon.
is it this project called IDD Samples? Is that
Yeah,
okay? Yeah, I
yep.
see. All right.
It's the entire project, all of it, and it's been like this treasure trove of awesomeness.
Good to know. So
Yeah,
there's that. If you're following along at some point, go to github.com/Vaughn Vernon, and there's a project called IDDD_samples. So definitely look into that if you have the same questions that I've had this entire time, which is like, I really wish there was code that I could just look at that would show me
yep.
this. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever thought to go look. Well, I mean, I swear I Googled for this stuff at some point, but
Yeah, I don't remember. I think I joined I actually started. Go ahead.
no, I'm not saying anything. Uh-oh, I think. Did your internet get the best of you? Looks like.
Here I am.
Okay.
We'll see how well this works. It might be time to go away soon.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So we got the source code. That's cool. Are there any other things that you would want to say, or any other things that jumped out at you about the modules chapter that we should
You
talk about?
know, well, so the thing about the modules chapter is that along with the rest of the book, I wanted to know more, like what this actually looked like how would you really organize everything? And now I have all those answers because I can go look exactly any particular class that I was interested in, or value object, or entity, or service, or anti-corruption layer. I can go look and find it exactly where. I'm sorry.
through the power of the internet.
Yes.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that definitely. I think that will be a very tremendously awesome resource just to be able to, I guess, correlate
Yeah.
concepts that are introduced to actual implementations. That's awesome.
Yep. So yeah, if you want to know how, based on this chapter, you would place a certain type of class, you can just go find that class and see where he's suggesting you put it. And not necessarily that you can agree with exactly what he's saying, but you can at least see kind of the overall structure and the ideas that he had in mind when he was suggesting these things.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be interesting to me is just to look at. I mean, depending on how far he went with the implementations on the example, like just seeing, like he talked about how you've got a particular module, like he had like modules in like the Agile PM context or whatever, and then it had like a service and then a product, like a product aggregate, which then had reference to the tenant ID, which was in a totally different module, and then it also had interdependencies between sub-modules, I guess, within that module. And he was talking about like the dependencies and how you keep them unidirectional in some cases, but then he was like, well, this one's actually bidirectional, and so I would like to see that just to further my understanding of what he was talking about in that regard, because I think that's kind of where I usually get tripped up with separating things out into modules. Is like, well, you've got this aggregate over here, and then you've got something over here that needs to reference it, so you've got the ID or whatever, so like that's automatically a dependency on the or a lot of times ends up you're wanting to interact with that actual aggregate as opposed to just the ID or whatever. So like how do you deal with that situation in between these two distinct modules? Like I think that would be cool to look at in code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all there, man. It's all there.
That's cool. Another thing that I wanted to talk about that I think is interesting is like the very last thing that he says in the chapter is you got this section. It's like 2 paragraphs, and it's like favor modules before bounded context. Like I think that's like the gist of it is that you should consider it at least as an option. So like just really think about the way you'd be modeling something based on the words that are used to describe it, as to whether it should be its own bounded context or if it just represents another submodule or whatever. And I think that was cool just to think about, because I mean that I think is something that I over-applied in a previous experiment with this was, oh, I've got these separate discrete concepts, so they're all bounded context, so let me kind of have them all like really like I just want to make them all like beefy, and you're like, well, it doesn't really need to be that. Like they can just literally be modules within a bounded context because they are within the same. So I think that's something that it's good to read, that maybe that feeling of I've got a whole bunch of work that I've done and it's not really gaining me much because I've separated things into contexts where they just need to just be separate packages. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and then
so you know how. Okay. No, I was gonna talk about something. I was gonna talk about something completely different if I didn't know if you had more on this topic or not.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna pick up something else, so we can, go for it.
So I was gonna talk about last time. We talked about domain events, and we were all kind of like, well, why would you use them, or whatever.
Yeah.
I think we're all kind of like, huh? Well, since then, I've picked up event sourcing, and I've kind of like fallen deep down that rabbit hole, and domain events are awesome. They're like everything. That's how everything communicates. Everything is an event. Anything that happens is an event, and so I thought that was kind of fun. That since we talked about this last time, specifically in event sourcing, but even if you're not using event sourcing, everything can be an event. Anything can be an event, and you know, basically all of the interactions between anything can be considered an event, especially between the entities and the value objects and everything. It can all be handled, it can all be modeled using events instead of maintaining any state whatsoever. And it's, I don't know, it's been really fun looking at that, and especially given we had just talked about events, and I remembered everyone was pretty much like, well, okay, they're kind of neat, but I don't know when I would use them. And yeah, I don't know. It's been a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to getting back to the event sourcing chapter now, because I think the domain events will come back into play quite a bit at that point. And even in here, in this chapter, he did talk about, you know, where you put your events, and like he talked about them a lot, like or not a lot, but he mentioned events a few times as to where would you put your events in your modules, and it's like, you know, we're not really talking about events normally, or hadn't been in the past. Like, oh, okay, well, I guess there's some events. Maybe if I ever have an event, I'll put it in the module. But
yeah,
it's like a big deal for me now. I actually have like a submodule called events that every one of my aggregates has a ton of events now, and basically anything that the aggregate does is modeled by an event that's triggered. I think I had mentioned
that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So like you're talking about how you'd organize it. So do you see events kind of living at the same or in the same I guess pattern that he was introducing in terms of, you know, the services directory? Like do you have like a submodule called services and a submodule called model, or do you have them all in the same place, or what's like? Do you see them existing in that vein or differently?
I usually have a submodule events, or submodule model and a submodule services, and then I have underneath model I would have something like, say, brand as my aggregate, and inside brand I would have the brand entity, the brand repository interface, and what I've been experimenting with is having an events submodule of brand. And then in there, I would have all of the events. Just because that was the first way I tried to do it. In all of the examples from the book, the events live at the same level as the model itself. So, like next to the brand entity would be the brand-related events, where I put them underneath another.
They're not a separate concept in terms of like you wouldn't have models, services, and events. You would have services and models, and then models with events.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So you're going to publish a cool example of event sourcing, right?
Yeah, actually, I can send it. I can send you what I've been working on so far. I've been talking to Matthias.
Yes.
A bit. Before I got cut off earlier, I was mentioning that I found the IDD Samples because I joined. I think I've been a member, but I didn't post to it before. But the DDD and PHP group, and I was asking some like really basic questions about this sort of thing, and someone said, "Oh, you mean like this?" It linked to the exact class that I was asking about from the book on GitHub, and I was like, "What?" So yeah, I started hanging out in that group a little bit, and then at the end of the last thing, I mentioned the practical event sourcing talk.
Yeah.
And there was a project in there at the end that talk was based on called Buttercup Protects, which was basically an event sourcing aggregate root sort of set of interfaces to play with. And that was from Matthias. So yeah, I was playing with that quite a bit, and then switched over to another project that he's working on. So I do have a bunch of stuff based on that right now. And I have a little event store that I've been building, and have I actually have some working code. So it's pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with it so far. Basically, it's removed my need at all to have an ORM. It solves all of the problems that at least right now, it solves almost all the problems that I've ever had with keeping state in a database using an ORM. So I'm really excited about it.
So it's broken your dependence on doctrine?
Yeah, I mean, I was already trying to get away from it, and now I'm not even worried about it. It makes it's, I don't know, it's just one of those things where like a light goes off, and it's like as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting, whatever. But as soon as I actually like got about, I'd say 20% into trying it out, like I just like knew like, oh my goodness, this is gonna make everything so easy. It's just
Yeah.
like the repository layer is like 6 lines of code. Seriously, it's like nothing. Like there's like, I don't know. I know that it can get a lot more complicated, and my current implementation is very naive. It's very basic, but it's based off of the stuff actually from this book, from the event sourcing chapter. So I mean, I know it works, and it seems to be working fine for what I'm doing. Though Matthias, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I should figure that out. He's building a more robust event store that has a lot more options, and is a lot more complicated. But at the basic level of what you're doing with it, it's just amazing how like it's just simple. You have pure objects and pure code just talking to each other, and you don't have to worry about a lot of things. So I don't know. I'm sure that there's going to be something that comes up later that I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be complicated. But yeah, so far I'm pretty excited.
So the next dev book club, you're gonna be like, don't do that anymore. It sucks, right?
Yep.
No, probably not.
Yeah. There's some questions that I have that we can get into it in the event sourcing chapter, but things like if your events change, like if you actually have new events, or like if the event behavior changes, if you have a recorded log of events, well, if those events are no longer relevant, or no, like they don't mean anything anymore, I don't know how that is resolved, if that makes sense.
So is it kind of like versioning your events?
Yeah. Like I'm not sure how that is handled. Like, no, I haven't seen anyone really discussing that at all. So it works really great for greenfield projects, but I don't know how far. I don't know how you handle some issues like, okay, well, my model has changed drastically. Now I have 2 years worth of event data that is no longer relevant, or the entity doesn't exist anymore. The entity's been split into different entities or whatever. I don't know how all of that is supposed to work, but I'm going to tackle that when I get to it. I'm trying not to get too hung up on it right now.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's one of those. This was kind of like API versioning and stuff. It's like, oh, I'll tackle that later when I get to that problem, and then you get there and you're like, oh crap, now I'm screwed. Like that's that's always my experience with that type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So like with the module stuff, like digging through a bunch of the code, I had a lot of questions why things were in certain places. But I did start to better understand what the application layer was, and that's always kind of bothered me because I didn't really know before, like the application module, submodule, or whatever.
Sure.
I've seen a couple of places talk about that, and I thought I kind of got it, but now I feel like I still can't describe it, but I feel like I have a better handle on what that is supposed to be versus like the domain stuff. There were also a bunch of, I don't remember what talked about it in the book, but it actually has stuff broken out for both like the infrastructure style and also the ports and adapter style, and that was kind of interesting to see how those submodules worked, or those modules worked.
So you mean it has breakdowns for like a layered architecture versus a hexagonal? Is that?
Yep.
Cool.
So like one of the projects is in one style, and one of the other projects is in another style. So one is in hexagonal, and the other one is in the layer style. So you can kind of look at them and see how they go together. He also has a common module, which was kind of interesting because I've always wondered where to put the common stuff, and yeah, that one really got me confused a little bit because it didn't have like a one-to-one mapping with like any of the domains, which makes sense because it was common. But I felt like I disagreed with some of the things that were going on there. just because it was confusing me. So I don't know. If you take a look at that, I'd be curious to know if you feel the same sort of way about that. But
okay, yeah,
I was just tickled pink that there was anything there at all for me to look at.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's been like a recurring theme that I know I've probably said it 15 times while reading this book is I really wish this was just coded somewhere that I could just look at this as opposed to these little snippets of of pseudocode, right? Like I want to see like how does this actually look. So yeah, that's definitely cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another just interesting point was just naming, right? Like it goes back to like the classic problem that we face as developers of naming things appropriately. And so like just kind of I think his discussion was useful about how originally they thought about naming things after the products that they are like they're I forget like PM Ovation or whatever Project Ovation or whatever it's called, and it's like but then really that's not telling you anything. So I think that's kind of an interesting or just like a good takeaway is just like when you're thinking about how do you actually name your modules, you should name them something that is or explicitly tells you what's in that module as opposed to or how that module fits in, I guess, as opposed to just naming it off of something cutesy. Like this is a problem that I run into in the Rails and Ruby land is everything has a cool name. So you have to name your gems something unicorny or whatever, and then so if you have a module called unicorn, I'm not going to know what that is. Like that's completely useless to me. So I think that's just something to like take away is if you really want to do a good job of this, you have to think about what you're naming it and why. Like branding is great and having like distinctive names for things is awesome, but if your module name doesn't really tell you what it is, then it's kind of useless.
Yeah. I've gone through cycles on that, and at one point, I remember very clearly one project I had named everything after Adult Swim characters. Like all of the apps and all of the libraries were named after Adult Swim characters. And at the time, I was like, that's great. Now I know that that's just wrong. I'm actually struggling with that a little bit with my startup. One of the developers is naming all of the projects after famous mathematicians. And like the description for the repository isn't what's in the repository. It's describing who this famous mathematician was. so I'll and I don't look at the code often enough for it to register for me, but I'll go and look and it'll be like some obscure famous but obscure mathematician if you aren't into math people. And then I'll be like, okay, well, what is this? And so I look at the description. It's like, oh, okay, well, he sounds cool, but what is this project? So it's one of those things where I know that I've gone through cycles on that, and yeah, I'm dealing with the other side of it right now. So
yeah,
I think we've agreed that going forward we're going to name the project. Yeah, something relevant to what the project is, at least for anything public-facing where anyone else might look at it. Yeah, but the repository name might stay the same, but all the other documentation is going to refer to them as the correct app.
Yeah, I mean, so where I work, we have some we've named things. We try to name them something that's creative but still kind of relevant. So, like our user management and profile system is called Rolodex. So, kind of makes sense. Like that's where you go look up people's information, and then you've got our inventory management stuff is called Warehouse. So, like we try to name things in like an interesting way, but still semi-relevant. But I was just kind of thinking about how funny it is because now we've, some of those things are essentially products. So like, Rolodex could be its own thing. Like part of what our user management system does is kind of like a whole separate thing. Could be branded and named something completely different. But as long as we name it appropriately, we're fine. Like all the modules internally that depend on it or use it refer to it correctly, then we're okay. Like I just kind of took that away from this chapter as affirmation that I wasn't crazy when I was demanding that things be named in a way that made sense, as opposed to just famous mathematician based, I
Yeah.
guess.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't want to call him out too much on that because I know that people go in cycles on those sorts of things, but it was just a very clear example of this in action, of naming it after something completely irrelevant.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think
There
that
was a
concept was cool. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's interesting, but
yeah,
at the same time, you kind of need some hint. What's going on in here?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about even some of my open source projects, and some of them are named something very obvious, and some of them are named something completely irrelevant, like Sculpin. I mean, that has no meaning to anybody. So, I mean, I don't know. On one hand, there's like a branded product, and then on the other hand, there's like the internal libraries, and those are usually named a little more. Those are named usually a little better. I think the weirdest one that I have is Snort, and um, it's for looking at files to determine information about them. So that's probably the weirdest named one that I have. And I think I have a content analyzing library, which I think Snort is a part of, called Canal. So I'll sometimes do things like that, but for the most part, I try to keep them like Doctrine Orm Service Provider is probably the biggest one that I have.
That's so
It's named
boring.
what it is. I know
That's
it's so
so
boring. It should
boring,
have been named
though.
something awesome. I
Yeah.
know. So yeah, even within my current projects, I kind of swing both ways. So it is something to keep in mind.
Yeah. I just brought it up because I thought it was something that was useful for thinking about, just
Yep.
like somewhat relevant. So yeah, there's that. I don't think there's anything else that. I mean, I really liked this chapter because I think it was kind of really surprisingly to the point for this book. Like, I thought it was just kind of, here's the information, boom, 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 use
Mm-hmm.
it, like, and less of my least favorite thing in this book is, we're going to talk about aggregates in 5 chapters. We're going to talk about this in 5 chapters. We're going to do this. Remember this, and like jumping around of concepts just really drives me nuts. So I think this particular chapter was very
Mm-hmm.
content dense, I guess, and like 5 pages long. So it was great.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. So is there
Sweet.
anything else that you wanted to
Yeah.
touch on?
Yeah. I actually have this. No, I don't think so. This is one of the chapters that I actually have bookmarked because I've come back here quite a bit.
I think it'd be a
It
useful
seems
one
like
to
it's a
kind
pretty
of.
important thing to keep in mind.
I think I would like to take this chapter and kind of make it required reading for any new developers that come onto my team, right? Like, just read, if you read nothing else, just read this particular chapter, just kind of understand the concepts, because I
Yeah.
think it has impact beyond just simply here's how you organize modules in a DDD fashion. Like, it has, in my opinion at least, it has impact of, like, here's how you think about organization of things, and like really take the time to understand why you're doing what you're doing and why you're putting something where you are. So, like, why is it in a context as opposed to a module, or why is it named this, or why is it in a sub package? Like, all of these, the why questions, I think, are the key, and I think that's kind of what I took away from the chapter, is just think about organization from a utilitarian standpoint, uh, as well as like like a conceptual way. Like, just think of it in practical and conceptual, and there's a
Mhm.
balance. And so I think that's where he was talking about the whole, your team is going to have to decide, do you want to have a sub package called models inside your particular module or not? Like, just, it's a decision to make. Like, do your services belong at the same level, or are they in different sub modules or whatever? It's like, it just, think about, for what you're doing,
Yeah.
how that's going to work.
Hmm. So actually, if we're almost done with this topic, sort of related is the next topic, which is aggregates. Um,
Yes.
and it's interesting for me because I feel like over the last 2 or 3 weeks I've come to understand that I don't understand aggregates. And that sort of comes into the modules where underneath a model, like I always assumed each next layer was going to be an aggregate. Like each submodule of model was an aggregate, and that there was always one entity per aggregate. Or maybe there's another, like maybe there would be another aggregate, but I never understood. I think I actually asked you about that at Lone Star PHP. When would you ever have an aggregate that's not an aggregate root? Like, I don't know. Like, why would you ever have, like, I don't know which cases you would have for that. And in the IDD samples, actually the collaboration context has 3 aggregates. I think they have 3 aggregates in one submodule. So it's like model dot forum dot, and then inside there was discussion, forum, and topic, I think. So they had 3 aggregates, 3 aggregate roots, I guess, inside one module, which is something, or one submodule, which is something I've never done before. I've always had one submodule per aggregate.
Yeah, so that's kind of like in this chapter, he actually gave an example of that with the in Agile PM, he has a submodule called Team, which has a member service, and then it has 3 aggregates: product owner, team, and team member. So they're all kind of individual aggregates, but they've got interdependencies, because like the product owner and team members are created by the member service, and then like the product owner, or each team has a product owner and then any number of team members. So that's like building up a scrum. Like you've got this product owner, then you've got all these team members. So all of those are distinct aggregates within this module, but they are also kind of combined, right? So I guess is that what you're getting at, like when you would have that situation?
Yeah. So so I've always just modeled them each as their own aggregate root in their own submodule. I've never tried to combine aggregates into the same submodule.
Oh, so you'd have like so you'd have like a product, or you'd have like a team submodule, and then that would have a team aggregate, and then separate from that, you'd have like a product
submodule,
which had a product owner inside of it.
Right. Or wherever it made sense.
Right. Sure.
That relationship to live. But yeah, I've never tried to put them together in one thing, and I think that for a long time, I've sort of been blending the concept of the bounded context and aggregate roots somehow. I've sort of been treating each aggregate root as if it were its own bounded context in a sense. And I think that might be what you were kind of saying earlier too, that you were having problems knowing when you could reference other things.
Right. Yeah.
So, and within, like if you model it more like what he's suggesting here, and actually not treating the submodule as sort of like a, I don't know how to describe it. Like the submodule isn't a home for one aggregate root. It could potentially be the home for multiple. Then they can all, it's easier to see how they interact with each other and that they should live next to each other. Whereas I was always segregating them. And I think that's something that I need to learn a little better, how to relax that and not just automatically create a new submodule for each new aggregate root just because that's what I do. You know, I should see if they should be together for other reasons. So I thought that's something that I'm actively working on, I think.
Yeah, I think I've gone down that path too. Like in previous projects, especially, like, you know, focusing so much on, well, you know, I've got those aggregate roots. Like, yeah, like exactly what you're saying. Like this has to be one single concept. So this is obviously the, you know, user's bounded context. Like all my user stuff is here, and then this has user, and then I've got this other concept that's related to users, but it's its own aggregate. So I need to move it. Like it has to be separate. It's like you think about it, like it's a separate concept, so it has to have a separate home, but it doesn't necessarily I think the breakthrough is thinking of things as components that make up a singular, like a solution, as opposed to like thinking of them as their implementations. I think is kind of how I see breaking away from the pattern, is like not thinking about the implementation of them and thinking of what are the concepts at play here, and then that informs the models. Like just really, really, again, thinking about what you're doing and how you're grouping things as opposed to just mechanically doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, the mechanical aspect is what I've been struggling with. I think that I'm looking for like a silver bullet and a pattern that I can always use. And anytime I fall into that trap, I know that there's probably something I'm missing. So.
Yeah, I feel like he also referenced that in this chapter, like, or maybe it was another chapter. I'm trying to remember. Like he talked about this idea of like when he was talking about the separating things by their implementation, like not doing that. Like I think that's kind of the same concept of that tactical or mechanical separation is something to be wary of, I would say.
Yeah, so in the wrap-up, it says, you saw how designing modules incorrectly, even mechanically, actually stifles modeling creativity.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I don't know which section in the actual chapter says that, but or which part in the actual chapter.
Yeah, I like I said, I feel like I did remember reading that, but I don't know where it is exactly either.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm kind of excited about getting into the aggregates chapter. Finally, it's a long one, but I think it's good since we kind of talked about. Again, this is a complaint I have about the book, but we've talked about aggregates in almost every single chapter, and it's like you have little bitty pieces, and it's like, but we'll talk more about that later. And so it's like, you really just want to get to understanding the concept, and then like right after that, you got factories and then repositories, I think. So it's like, these very important concepts that we've kind of been touching on in every single chapter. We're now going to actually dive into them. So I'm excited about the next 2 or 3 discussions. So.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw aggregates was next because I was like, we haven't talked about them yet?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Well, we have.
Are you sure that's next? I mean, didn't we talk about? No. Oh. No, we didn't. And I didn't believe it. I actually had to go to the table of contents, and I'm like, what? No. How did we not talk about this yet?
You're like, did I get a misprint or something? Yeah, I think that would kind of be a cool book. Yeah. I think just like having, chapter 2, a brief introduction to aggregates, and then chapter 10, the most in-depth aggregate coverage you could come up with. Like I think that would be useful for this book, is since you've already got that brief chapter in small sections in the other 9 chapters previous to covering aggregates, I think just having like a dedicated, here's what you need to know would be quite useful. So that's my feedback if you're listening, Vaughn Vernon. That's my feedback for your book. Which he's totally not listening, but whatever.
Nice.
All right, cool. I don't have anything else module related and or upcoming related. Are you golden?
I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining.
I think we need to start getting more people.
Yes, I agree. I don't know the right answer to that though. See, the problem is, we've got the people that have been participating, and then it seems like every other time I pick like a day that really is terrible for them, and then everyone else that wants to join, but they're like, well, I'm way behind on the book, so I feel like I would be useless in the discussions, which may or may not be true depending on how far or how much they understand like the previous 9 chapters or whatever, which I totally understand, but yeah, it's a tough problem to solve, I think. But I'm open to suggestions or help or whatever. I saw you tweeting about it, which is awesome, so thanks for that.
Yeah, I've been trying. Sure, I think Nomad PHP always seems to retweet anytime I post something about this. It's like the only thing they retweet for me is basically saying, come to the book club, and I'm like, sweet. So lots of people see that.
Yes, which is nice. Thank you very much, Cal, if you're not listening. So, all right, cool. Well, it was a good discussion. We'll cover aggregates in 2 weeks. Hopefully in 2 weeks. I'll try to schedule that and get tweets out, and we'll see if we can get some people in here. So, all right, thanks a lot, Bo.
Cool. Yep, thanks.